Sometimes the most powerful people in a room are the ones you never see coming. They don't announce themselves with fancy titles or expensive suits. They don't demand respect through intimidation or loud voices. Instead, they watch, they listen, and they let others reveal exactly who they are before making their move. In a world where assumptions rule first impressions, where age and appearance often determine how we treat strangers, one man was about to learn the hardest lesson of his career. He thought he knew power when he saw it. He believed authority always wore a certain face, spoke with a particular tone, and commanded attention through traditional means. But on this ordinary Tuesday morning, in a conference room filled with tension and unspoken challenges, he would discover that real leadership doesn't always look the way we expect it to. And sometimes the person you underestimate the most is exactly the person who holds your future in their hands. What happens when confidence becomes arrogance? When assumptions turn into career-ending mistakes? When the person you dismiss as insignificant turns out to be the most important person in the room? This is the story of Marcus Chun, an ambitious sales director who thought he had figured out the corporate game, and Sarah Williams, a soft-spoken woman who proved that true authority doesn't need a shout to be heard. Their collision course would change everything both of them believed about power, respect, and what it really means to lead. Marcus Chun straightened his Italian silk tie and checked his reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors one final time. At 34, he had climbed the corporate ladder faster than anyone in his department, and today's presentation to the new regional director would cement his position as the obvious choice for the upcoming vice president role. He had spent 3 weeks perfecting every slide, every statistic, every compelling argument that would showcase his sales team's record-breaking performance. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 20th floor of the downtown Seattle office building. Marcus stepped out with the confident stride of someone who owned the hallway, his expensive leather briefcase swinging at his side. He had heard rumors about the new regional director, someone brought in from the East Coast to shake things up, but Marcus wasn't worried. He had dealt with corporate politics before, and his numbers spoke louder than any executive's personal agenda. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus entered. A dozen department heads sat around the mahogany table, their laptops open and presentations queued up. Marcus recognized most faces. Jennifer from marketing, who always overpromised and underdelivered. Tom from operations, whose team consistently missed deadlines. And David from finance, who seemed to find problems with every innovative idea Marcus proposed. But there were also several people Marcus didn't recognize. A young man in his 20s sat near the far end of the table, typing rapidly on his phone. 2 women in their 40s whispered quietly while reviewing printed documents. And in the corner, almost invisible, sat a woman who couldn't have been older than 28, wearing a simple gray cardigan and taking notes in an old-fashioned paper notebook. Marcus claimed the seat he always preferred, directly across from where the presenter would stand, where his reactions and questions would be most visible to whoever was running the meeting. He opened his briefcase with deliberate precision, arranging his materials in perfect order. The quarterly reports that proved his team had exceeded targets by 40%. The client testimonials that praised his personal attention to their accounts. The expansion proposal that could bring in $2 million in new revenue within 6 months. "Excuse me," came a soft voice from his left. Marcus turned to see the young woman in the gray cardigan looking at him with polite eyes. "I think you might be in the wrong seat." Marcus blinked, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "That seat," she said, pointing to the chair Marcus had chosen. "I believe it's reserved for someone else." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had been sitting in this exact spot for the past 2 years during monthly department meetings. It was his unofficial assigned seat, the position that showed he was a key player in the room. "I think there's been some confusion," he said, his voice carrying the patient tone he used when explaining obvious things to junior employees. "I always sit here. This is where senior staff members are expected to sit." The woman's expression remained calm, almost serene. "Oh, I see. You must be Marcus from sales." I've heard wonderful things about your team's performance. That's right, Marcus replied, feeling somewhat mollified by the recognition. And you are? Sarah, she said simply, returned her notebook. Marcus waited for more information, a last name, a department, an explanation of why she was even in this meeting, but Sarah seemed completely absorbed in whatever she was writing. Marcus glanced around the room, wondering if anyone else had noticed this odd interaction, but everyone seemed focused on their own preparations. At exactly 9 o'clock, the conference room door opened and Robert Harrison, the company CEO, stepped inside. Marcus automatically straightened in his chair. Harrison commanded attention without trying, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit clearly custom-tailored. But what surprised Marcus was that Harrison wasn't alone. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison said, his voice filling the room easily. "I want to thank you all for making time in your schedules for this important meeting. As you know, we've been through some significant changes in our leadership structure over the past few months, and today marks another important milestone in our company's evolution." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This sounded like the kind of moment where promotions were announced, where hard work and results were finally recognized with corner offices and substantial salary increases. "I'm pleased to introduce you to your new regional director," Harrison continued, "someone who comes to us with an impressive track record of transforming underperforming divisions into industry leaders. Over the past 15 years, she has consistently delivered results that exceeded expectations while building teams that other companies tried to steal." Marcus scanned the room, looking for the power-dressed executive he expected to see. Perhaps someone had been waiting outside, preparing to make a dramatic entrance. He had seen this kind of corporate theater before, the carefully orchestrated introduction designed to establish authority and command respect from the first moment. But Harrison wasn't looking toward the door. Instead, his gaze had settled on the quiet corner where Sarah sat with her notebook. "Sarah Williams has agreed to take on the challenge of leading our Pacific Northwest operations," Harrison said, and Marcus felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. "She'll be working closely with each of your departments to identify opportunities for growth and efficiency improvements." Marcus stared as Sarah, the same Sarah who had asked him to move seats, the Sarah he had dismissed as some junior employee who had wandered into the wrong meeting, stood up and walked to the front of the room. She moved with unhurried confidence, her simple cardigan and modest appearance suddenly, seeming less like inexperience and more like someone who didn't need expensive clothes to command attention. "Thank you, Robert," Sarah said, her soft voice somehow carrying easily to every corner of the room. "I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you and learning more about the exceptional work you're already doing." Marcus felt his face growing warm. He had just questioned the authority of his new boss. Worse, he had done it in a condescending tone that implied she didn't belong in the room at all. Around the conference table, he could sense other people stealing glances at him, and he wondered if they had witnessed his mistake. Sarah continued speaking, outlining her vision for the region and her plans for individual department assessments. Her words were measured and thoughtful, revealing a deep understanding of market dynamics and operational challenges that Marcus hadn't expected from someone who looked so young and unassuming. "Over the next few weeks," Sarah was saying, "I'll be meeting with each department head individually to review current performance and discuss strategic priorities moving forward. I believe in collaborative leadership, which means I want to understand your perspectives before making any significant changes." Marcus tried to focus on what Sarah was saying, but his mind kept replaying their earlier interaction. Had his tone been as dismissive as he remembered? Had other people noticed? More importantly, what did this mean for his chances at the vice president position he had been counting on? As Sarah wrapped up her introduction and began outlining the schedule for individual meetings, Marcus found himself studying her with new eyes. Now that he knew who she was, he could see subtle signs of authority he had missed before. The way she held herself, completely comfortable despite being the youngest person in the room. The manner in which she made eye contact with each person as she spoke, as if she was already taking measure of their potential. the confidence in her voice that came not from arrogance, but from competence. When the meeting ended, Marcus remained in his seat as the room gradually emptied. He needed a moment to process what had just happened and to figure out how to recover from his mistake. But as he gathered his presentation materials, the carefully prepared slides that he hadn't even had a chance to present, he realized that Sarah was approaching his seat. "Marcus," she said, that same calm tone she had used earlier. "I was hoping we could schedule some time to chat this week. I'd love to hear more about your team's recent successes." Marcus looked up, tried to read her expression for any sign of anger or disappointment about their earlier exchange. But Sarah's face revealed nothing beyond professional interest and what might have been the slightest hint of amusement. "Of course," Marcus managed. "Whenever works for your schedule. How about Thursday morning? Say 10 o'clock in my office." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak without betraying the anxiety that was building in his chest. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes, and turned to leave. "Oh, and Marcus," she said, pausing at the door. "For future meetings, feel free to sit wherever you're comfortable. I don't pay much attention to seating arrangements." As the conference room door closed behind her, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he had severely underestimated the woman who now controlled his career trajectory. The presentation he had prepared, full of numbers and achievements that had seemed so impressive an hour ago, now felt inadequate. Sarah Williams had taken control of the room without raising her voice, without intimidation, without any of the traditional power displays Marcus had come to expect from executives. He gathered his materials and headed back to his office, his mind already racing through possible strategies for Thursday's meeting. But beneath his tactical thinking, a deeper question was forming, one that would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about leadership and authority. If Sarah Williams could command respect so effortlessly while wearing a cardigan and taking notes in a paper notebook, what did that say about his own approach to climbing the corporate ladder? The elevator ride down to his 15th floor office gave Marcus time to replay the morning's events. Each time he remembered his interaction with Sarah, he felt a fresh wave of embarrassment. He had assumed that authority would announce itself with expensive suits and commanding voices. He had expected power to look a certain way, to fit into the mold he had been taught to recognize. But Sarah Williams had shattered those assumptions in the span of a 30-minute meeting. She had proven that real leadership didn't need to prove itself to be effective. And now Marcus faced the uncomfortable truth that his entire understanding of corporate success might be fundamentally flawed. As he reached his office and closed the door behind him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Thursday's meeting would be about much more than discussing his team's quarterly performance. It would be a reckoning with his own prejudices and assumptions, a test he wasn't sure he was prepared to pass. The next 2 days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Marcus found himself second-guessing every decision, every email, every conversation with his team members. Word had spread quickly through the office about the new regional director, and Marcus noticed the way people's eyes lingered on him during meetings, as if they knew something he didn't. On Wednesday afternoon, Marcus ran into Jennifer from marketing in the break room. She was stirring her coffee with unusual intensity, her face tight with worry. "Have you heard anything about what she's planning?" Jennifer asked without preamble, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Who?" "Sarah." Marcus tried to sound casual, but his voice betrayed his anxiety. "I heard she's done complete overhauls at her previous companies," Jennifer whispered. "Apparently, she cleaned house at her last position, laid off 30% of the management team, and restructured the entire organization." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Where did you hear that?" "Tom in operations has a friend who worked at her previous company in Boston. Said she came in quiet and unassuming, just like she did here, then systematically dismantled everything that wasn't working." Jennifer took a sip of her coffee, her hand trembling slightly. "Apparently, she's got this reputation for being incredibly thorough. Spends weeks just observing and taking notes before making any moves. The image of Sarah's paper notebook flashed through Marcus's mind. Those weren't random notes she had been taking during the meeting. She had been studying all of them, cataloging their behaviors, their reactions, their competencies. Marcus remembered how carefully she had watched everyone as they spoke, how she had seemed to catalog every interaction. But that could be good news for some of us, Marcus said, trying to convince himself as much as Jennifer. If she's focused on results, then departments that are performing well should be safe. Jennifer gave him a look that suggested she wasn't buying his optimism. Maybe, but I also heard she's really good at spotting people who talk a big game but don't deliver. Apparently, she has zero patience for politics or ego. That evening, Marcus stayed late in the office, poring over his team's performance data with new eyes. He had always been proud of their 40% increase in sales, but now he found himself examining the numbers more critically. Yes, they had exceeded their targets, but how much of that success was due to favorable market conditions? How much was the result of his leadership versus the talent of his individual team members? For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to consider the possibility that his success might not be as impressive as he had believed. His team consisted of 8 sales representatives, 6 of whom had been top performers long before Marcus became their manager. The 2 newer hires had struggled initially, and Marcus realized with uncomfortable clarity that he had spent more time taking credit for the successful team members than actually developing the ones who needed guidance. Thursday morning arrived with Seattle's typical October drizzle, and Marcus found himself standing outside Sarah's office at exactly 10 o'clock. The nameplate on the door was simple and elegant: Sarah Williams, Regional Director. Through the glass panel, he could see her sitting at her desk, reading what appeared to be a thick report. Marcus knocked softly, and Sarah looked up with the same calm expression she had worn during their first meeting. "Marcus, please come in," she said, gesturing to one of the chairs arranged in front of her desk. "Thank you for making time this morning." The office was modest by executive standards, decorated with a few personal touches that revealed glimpses of Sarah's personality. A small plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves healthy and well-tended. A framed photograph showed Sarah with what appeared to be her family: parents, siblings, and a golden retriever, all of them smiling on what looked like a hiking trail. But what struck Marcus most was the bookshelf behind Sarah's desk, packed with volumes on leadership theory, organizational psychology, and business strategy. "I hope you don't mind," Sarah said, following Marcus's gaze to the books, "but I'm something of a student when it comes to management philosophy. I find that the more I learn about what makes teams successful, the better I can support the people I work with." Marcus settled into his chair, his prepared talking points suddenly feeling inadequate. He had planned to lead with his team's impressive sales figures, to establish his value to the organization from the first moment. But something about Sarah's approach, her genuine interest in learning rather than proving herself, made his usual pitch seem hollow. "I've been reviewing your team's performance data," Sarah continued, opening a folder on her desk. "The numbers are quite impressive. 40% growth over the previous year is nothing to dismiss." Marcus felt a surge of relief. "Thank you. We've worked really hard to build relationships with our key clients and identify new market opportunities." Sarah nodded, but Marcus noticed she was studying him rather than the papers in front of her. "Tell me about your approach to team management. How do you motivate your sales representatives?" It was a straightforward question, but Marcus found himself hesitating. His usual response would be to talk about setting clear targets and rewarding high performance, but something in Sarah's patient attention made him want to give a more thoughtful answer. "Well," Marcus began, "I think it's important to recognize that different people are motivated by different things. Some of my team members are driven by commission opportunities, while others are more interested in developing new skills or taking on leadership responsibilities." "That's insightful," Sarah said. "Can you give me some specific examples of how you've adapted your management style to meet individual needs?" Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. The truth was he had used a fairly standard approach with all of his team members: set targets, track progress, reward success, and address problems when they arose. He hadn't spent much time considering what might motivate each person individually. I try to have regular one-on-one meetings with everyone, he said, aware that his answer was vague. We discuss their goals and any challenges they're facing. Sarah made a note in her ever-present notebook. How often do you hold these meetings? Marcus realized with uncomfortable clarity that his one-on-one meetings had become increasingly infrequent over the past year. As his team's performance had improved, he had assumed they needed less oversight, not more individual attention. It varies depending on workload, he said, hoping Sarah wouldn't press for more specific details. But Sarah seemed to sense his discomfort. She leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. Marcus, can I share something with you? In my experience, the most successful managers are the ones who are constantly questioning their own assumptions about what makes people effective. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. When I first became a manager, I thought leadership was about having the right answers and making decisive decisions. I spent a lot of energy trying to prove I belonged in positions of authority. Sarah's voice carried a note of self-reflection that surprised Marcus. But over time, I realized that the best leaders are usually the ones asking the best questions, not providing all the solutions. Something in Sarah's tone encouraged Marcus to be more honest than he had planned. I'll admit, I was surprised when I learned you were our new regional director. I had made assumptions based on things that turn out to be completely irrelevant. Sarah smiled, and Marcus was relieved to see genuine warmth in her expression. You mean you assumed I was too young, or not assertive enough, or didn't look like what you expected an executive to look like? Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment. Something like that. I get that reaction fairly often, Sarah said matter-of-factly. I used to let it bother me, but I've learned that people's initial assumptions can actually work to my advantage. When people underestimate you, they tend to reveal more about themselves than they would if they saw you as a threat. Marcus realized that Sarah was describing exactly what had happened during their first interaction. He had dismissed her so completely that he had shown her precisely who he was, someone who made snap judgments based on appearance and age, someone who felt entitled to certain privileges based on seniority. The thing is, Sarah continued, I'm much less interested in how people react to authority than I am in how they treat people they think have no power. That tells me everything I need to know about their character and their potential as leaders. The weight of Sarah's words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just talking about leadership philosophy. She was explaining exactly how she had evaluated him from their very first exchange. And the evaluation, Marcus realized, had not gone in his favor. Can I ask you something? Sarah said, her tone remaining conversational despite the seriousness of the moment. What do you think makes someone ready for increased responsibility? Marcus considered the question carefully. His instinct was to talk about results and performance metrics, but Sarah's approach to the conversation suggested she was looking for something deeper. I think it's about understanding that leadership isn't about you, Marcus said slowly. It's about making the people around you more successful than they would be on their own. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. And how do you think someone demonstrates that kind of leadership? Marcus felt as though he was being led toward an uncomfortable truth. By focusing on developing others instead of just promoting themselves. By asking better questions instead of assuming they have all the answers. He paused, the implications of his own words becoming clear. By treating everyone with respect, regardless of their position or perceived importance. Exactly, Sarah said quietly. And that's something I look for in every interaction, not just in formal presentations or performance reviews. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Marcus knew that Sarah was giving him a chance to acknowledge his mistake without forcing him to explicitly confess to behavior they both knew had occurred. It was a generous gesture, and Marcus felt both grateful and ashamed. I think I have some work to do, Marcus said finally, in terms of developing my leadership approach. We all do, Sarah replied. The moment we think we've figured it out is usually the moment we stop growing. She closed the folder on her desk and leaned forward slightly. Marcus, your team's results are genuinely impressive, and it's clear you have strong relationships with your clients. But I think you have the potential to be an even more effective leader than you already are. Marcus felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. What would that look like? I'd like to see you spend more time developing your team members individually. Really get to know what motivates each person, what their career goals are, what challenges they're facing that might not show up in performance metrics. Sarah pulled out her notebook and wrote something down. I'd also like to see you take on a mentorship role with some of our newer employees outside your department. You mean like a formal program? Not necessarily formal, but intentional. I've noticed that the best leaders are the ones who are genuinely invested in developing talent throughout the organization, not just within their own teams. Sarah looked up from her notebook. Would you be interested in working with me on some leadership development initiatives? I'm planning to implement some new programs over the next few months. Marcus felt a surge of surprise and gratitude. Despite his poor first impression, Sarah was offering him an opportunity to grow and contribute at a higher level. Absolutely. I'd be honored to be involved. Good. I'll be in touch with more details soon. Sarah stood up, signaling the end of their meeting. And Marcus, I appreciate your honesty today. That takes courage, and courage is essential for effective leadership. As Marcus left Sarah's office, he felt as though the past hour had fundamentally changed his understanding of both leadership and himself. Sarah had managed to challenge his assumptions, correct his behavior, and offer him new opportunities, all without making him feel attacked or defensive. She had demonstrated the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself because it was grounded in genuine competence and care for others. Walking back to his own office, Marcus realized that his encounter with Sarah Williams had been more than just a professional wake-up call. It had been a masterclass in how real leaders operate, not through intimidation or power games, but through authentic connection and the patient work of helping others become their best selves. For the first time in years, Marcus felt excited about the challenge of improving his leadership skills rather than simply advancing his career. And he had Sarah Williams to thank for showing him the difference. 6 months later, Marcus barely recognized the leader he had become. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process of questioning his assumptions, changing his habits, and learning to see his role through an entirely different lens. The most significant change had been in his approach to team meetings. Where he had once dominated discussions with his own ideas and priorities, Marcus now spent most of his time listening. He asked questions that drew out his team members' insights and concerns. He discovered that Elena, one of his senior sales representatives, had developed an innovative approach to client retention that could be applied across the entire department. He learned that James, one of his newer hires, had been struggling not because he lacked ability, but because he learned best through hands-on collaboration rather than individual coaching. The results had been remarkable. His team's performance had improved by another 20%, but more importantly, the quality of their work had reached new heights. Client satisfaction scores had increased dramatically, and 3 of his team members had been promoted to leadership roles in other departments, a development that Marcus now saw as a sign of his success as a developer of talent rather than a threat to his own position. The mentorship program Sarah had suggested had become one of the most rewarding aspects of Marcus's work. He had been paired with 3 junior employees from different departments, and their monthly sessions had taught him more about leadership than any formal training program ever could have. Maria from customer service had shown him how to identify patterns in client feedback that revealed opportunities for improvement. David from marketing had helped him understand how sales and marketing could work more collaboratively to improve lead quality. And Jennifer, a recent college graduate in operations, had challenged him to consider how technology could streamline processes he had always assumed were necessary. But perhaps the most significant change had been in Marcus's relationship with Sarah herself. What had begun as a professionally corrective conversation had evolved into a genuine mentoring relationship that had expanded Marcus's understanding of what effective leadership could accomplish. On a rainy Thursday morning in April, Marcus found himself once again sitting in Sarah's office. But this time, the dynamic was completely different. Instead of feeling anxious and defensive, Marcus felt energized and eager to share updates on his various projects. "The Q1 results look fantastic," Sarah said, reviewing the report Marcus had submitted. "But I'm more interested in hearing about the leadership development work you've been doing." Marcus smiled, remembering how he used to focus exclusively on numbers and metrics. "The mentorship program has been incredible. I've learned as much from the people I'm supposedly mentoring as they've learned from me. Maybe more." "That's exactly how it's supposed to work," Sarah said. "What's been the most surprising discovery?" Marcus considered the question. "I think it's been realizing how much talent exists throughout the organization that I was completely blind to before. I used to think leadership was about having the best ideas, but now I see it's about recognizing great ideas wherever they come from and helping them flourish." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Can you give me a specific example?" "Actually, yes. Maria, in customer service, identified a pattern in our client complaints that revealed a gap in our onboarding process. Instead of just forwarding her analysis to management, I worked with her to develop a presentation for the executive team. Her recommendations have already improved our client retention rate by 15%. And what did Maria get out of that experience? Recognition, for one thing. But more importantly, she got to see how her daily work connects to the bigger picture of the company's success. She told me it was the first time she felt like her insights were valued at a strategic level." Marcus paused, remembering Maria's excitement after the presentation. "She's actually applied for a position in our strategic planning department." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, making a note in her notebook. "And how did it feel to help her achieve that kind of visibility?" Marcus realized a year ago he would have worried that promoting Maria's ideas might diminish his own importance. Now, her success felt like a natural extension of his role as a leader. Honestly, it felt better than any individual achievement I've ever had. There's something really powerful about knowing you've helped someone else reach their potential. Sarah smiled, and Marcus could see genuine pride in her expression. That's the moment when you know you've made the transition from being a manager to being a true leader. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering Marcus's various projects and initiatives. But as they wrapped up, Sarah leaned forward with an expression that Marcus had learned to recognize as her signal that something important was coming. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you," she said. "As you know, we're expanding our operations into the Portland market, and we need someone to lead that initiative. It would mean relocating, taking on significantly more responsibility, and building a team from scratch." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Portland expansion had been rumored for months, and he knew it represented a major opportunity for career advancement. But instead of immediately accepting, he found himself asking questions that would never have occurred to him a year ago. What's the timeline for the transition? And what kind of support would be available for team development? Sarah's smile widened. Those are exactly the right questions to ask. The timeline is flexible. We want to make sure whoever takes this role has adequate time to prepare and plan. And yes, there would be significant resources allocated for training and development programs. Marcus felt excited about the opportunity, but he also realized he needed to consider factors beyond his own career advancement. Would there be opportunities for some of my current team members to be involved? I'd hate to abandon the development work we've started here. Actually, we were hoping you'd want to bring some of your people with you. The Portland office would benefit from experienced team members who understand our culture and standards. Sarah pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. We're prepared to offer relocation packages for up to 4 of your current team members, and we want you to have input on hiring decisions for the remaining positions. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude that surprised him with its intensity. Sarah wasn't just offering him a promotion. She was providing him with the resources to continue developing the people he had come to see as his most important responsibility. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. "This position would report directly to me, but it would also involve significant autonomy. You'd be responsible not just for sales performance, but for establishing the leadership culture for the entire Portland operation. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and daunting. Marcus realized that Sarah was offering him the chance to implement everything he had learned about authentic leadership on a much larger scale. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Why me?" "I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I'm curious about your reasoning." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her considering how to respond. "When I first arrived here, I was watching everyone very carefully. I was looking for people who had the potential to grow, who were capable of learning from their mistakes, and who genuinely cared about developing others." Marcus felt his cheeks warm as he remembered their first interaction. "Your initial reaction to me told me a lot about your assumptions and biases," Sarah continued. "But more importantly, your response to feedback told me everything I needed to know about your character and your potential. The fact that you were willing to examine your own behavior and change your approach convinced me that you could become the kind of leader our organization needs." Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude, humility, and a deep appreciation for Sarah's patience and wisdom. "I owe you an enormous debt for giving me the chance to learn and grow." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah said firmly. "You did the work. You were willing to challenge your own assumptions and change your behavior. That's not something that can be taught. It's something that comes from character." As Marcus left Sarah's office that morning, he reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. He had begun the year focused on climbing the corporate ladder through individual achievement and political maneuvering. He was ending it with an opportunity to lead a major expansion, not because he had played the game better than anyone else, but because he had learned to see leadership as a responsibility to others rather than a privilege for himself. The Portland position would present new challenges and require skills Marcus was still developing. But for the first time in his career, he felt confident that he had the foundation necessary for authentic leadership: the ability to see potential in others, the humility to keep learning, and the understanding that true authority comes from service rather than status. 3 weeks later, as Marcus packed up his Seattle office in preparation for the move to Portland, he found himself thinking about the lessons he would carry forward. He had learned that assumptions could blind you to opportunities and relationships. He had discovered that real power came not from commanding respect, but from earning it through genuine care for others' success. Most importantly, he had realized that the best leaders were not the ones who had all the answers, but the ones who asked the right questions and created space for others to find their own solutions. On his last day in the Seattle office, Sarah stopped by to wish him well. As they shook hands, she pressed a small wrapped package into his palm. "A going-away gift," she said with a smile. Marcus opened it to find a simple leather notebook, similar to the one Sarah always carried. Inside the front cover, she had written, "For capturing the questions that matter most." Sarah, as Marcus looked at the notebook, he thought about all the assumptions he had made about leadership, authority, and success. Sarah Williams had challenged every one of those assumptions, not through confrontation or criticism, but through patient example and genuine investment in his growth. The woman he had initially dismissed as too young and too quiet to be in charge had turned out to be the most effective leader he had ever encountered. She had shown him that true authority didn't need to announce itself because it was grounded in competence, character, and an unwavering commitment to developing others. Marcus closed the notebook and slipped it into his briefcase, next to the presentation materials he had prepared for his first meeting with the Portland team. This time, instead of focusing solely on impressive statistics and personal achievements, his slides emphasized team development, collaborative problem-solving, and the importance of creating an environment where everyone's contributions were valued. As he walked out of the Seattle office for the last time, Marcus carried with him not just a new position and expanded responsibilities, but a fundamentally transformed understanding of what it meant to lead. Sarah Williams had questioned his authority by showing him what real authority looked like. And in doing so, she had given him the tools to become the kind of leader he had always aspired to be, even when he hadn't realized it was possible.